Good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome to this evening's Trust in the Tira. This evening, we're joined by Dr. Nora White. You're very welcome, Nora. Nora has a BA in History and Irish Studies from Maynooth University, followed later by a PhD. In 2006, she was awarded the O'Donovan Scholarship in the School of Celtic Studies and Treaty Project. She's probably covering all of her work. So Nora, over to you. You're very, very welcome this evening.
Thank you very much, Liam, and hello everybody, and thanks for joining. And I just want to thank Liam and everyone at Trust in the Tira for inviting me along as well. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about all things Ogham. And actually the first thing I'm going to do, because I always get asked this, Ogham, the pronunciation is Modern Irish. You may also have heard it pronounced as Ogham, which is actually the Old Irish pronunciation. So that's the difference between the two of those. And Old Irish is the form of the language that would have been spoken around the 8th or 9th century in Ireland, and it would be our earliest written Irish in manuscripts would be in Old Irish. So what is Ogham? Well, first I'm going to tell you what it is not. Ogham is not a language. It is not, or at least it was not originally, a tree alphabet. And it is certainly not a cryptic code invented by ancient Druids. Ogham is, in fact, a writing system or a script designed specifically for a very early form of the Irish language. Because of our surviving Ogham inscriptions, we know something about how the Irish language looked centuries before people started to write in manuscripts in Latin and Irish using the Latin insular script. The Ogham script was used to write short inscriptions on stone, known as Ogham stones, and probably also on wood, although we have no definite examples of inscriptions on wood surviving from this early period. Our earliest Ogham inscriptions are approximately dated on linguistic grounds to between the late 4th and the 7th century AD. So the Ogham stone you are looking at here is from Emloch East in West Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. It is known locally as Cloch a Taggart, the priest's stone. It also has a cross carved on the face, which is a bit hard to see here, but it's actually just here. And it was found standing upright at a possible early church site in a field near the Strand where it currently lies. This was the first Ogham stone officially recorded in Ireland in the early 1700s by Edward Cloyd, who was a Welsh naturalist, botanist, linguist, geographer, and antiquary. By the early 19th century, it lay on the shore nearby, washed by the high tide. It was removed to Shoot Hall by Lord Ventry in about 1849, but it was returned shortly afterwards. Today, it lies on a specially made concrete base on the shore near its original location. There is talk of having it moved once more a few meters in from the shore, as it is again occasionally covered by extra high tides, which in recent years have become all the more frequent. So where are Ogham stones found? Apart from being found in Ireland, they are mostly found they are also found in smaller numbers in Britain, primarily in areas of post-Roman Irish colonization in Wales and southwest England. They are also found in the Isle of Man and in Scotland. In Ireland, Ogham stones have been discovered in most counties, but the highest concentrations by far are in counties Kerry, Cork and Waterford in the southwest. And you will see here on this distribution map, all of the red dots are obviously Ogham stones, and you have a good few up into Leinster here. And there's this map is actually a little bit out of date. There are a few extra ones there in County Meath as well. And a line going across the North Midlands there. There are quite a few in Mayo and a few in Sligo, Roscommon as well as quite a few. But you can see that across the South Midlands, there are very few indeed. Some counties, Galway only has one or two possible examples. Laois, I think there was one that is now missing that wasn't at all certain. And Donegal actually doesn't have any that we know of, although there are a few in Northern Ireland. So today we have over 400 recorded Ogham stones of various stone types, shapes and sizes. So like these ones here from Drumlowan in County Waterford. We have one here from Kilmail Cader on the Dingan Peninsula, which also, as you can see, has a hole in the top of it. And the original function is open to interpretation. We have one of 10 stones here from Ballintaggart, also in West Kerry. And these are rounded water-rolled stones, probably from Minard Storm Beach nearby. And finally, one of our best preserved inscriptions on an Ogham stone from Thomastown in County Kilkenny. And this stone is now at Jerpoint Abbey. And each one of these stones has its own unique biography. So what about the function or functions of Ogham stones? Well, medieval Irish sagas occasionally mention Ogham stones being used to mark burials of heroes. And this would be the main presumed function, but we have yet to find direct archaeological evidence for this. Modern excavation at Ogham sites has rarely been undertaken. Also, many Ogham stones were moved from their original location and they were reused for other purposes. So for example, here we have actually 40% of Ogham stones are found reused as building material, mainly in suzerains, but also in churches and also later farm buildings as well. So we have a lovely example here of one from suzerain at Rathkenny, is Lismore, a suzerain in a ring fort in North Kerry. And this Ogham stone is being reused as a lintel in the suzerain. Also, likewise, down here we have on the left-hand side here, we have the gable of a medieval parish church in Knockboy in County Waterford, and you can see that both of the lintels here over the windows in the gable have Ogham inscriptions. And in fact, in this particular church, there are 6 Ogham stones built into the medieval parish church here, so it does happen quite a bit. And actually, with regard to suzerains, and for anyone who maybe isn't familiar with suzerains, these are dating mainly from the early medieval period. They are man-made underground caves, I suppose, man-made caves, sometimes earth cut, other times stone-lined. And when they are stone-lined, we do quite frequently actually find Ogham stones reused in suzerains, particularly in County Cork. And if anyone knows the collection at UCC, most of the stones in that collection are actually from suzerains in County Cork. One of the suzerains, in fact, had 15 Ogham stones used in its construction. So it certainly happens quite a lot that Ogham stones are reused in this way. In addition to Ogham inscriptions on stone, we also have a relatively small number of portable everyday items with Ogham inscriptions, like this amber bead here from County Clare and a knife handle here made of bone from Orkney in Scotland. We also have an example on metal, and this is the Ballyspellin brooch from County Kilkenny. And on the back, we actually have Ogham inscriptions. And this is from a few centuries later than the Ogham stones, this particular example. So let's have a look then at the Ogham script, which originally consisted of 20 characters representing the individual phonemes or sounds of a very early form of Irish, often referred to as primitive Irish, which makes it sound a bit like it's a simple or basic language, when in fact it is quite the opposite. And the language has in many ways actually simplified over time. These 20 characters or letters are divided into 4 groups, as you can see here. 2 of the groups are distinguished by the orientation of 1 to 5 horizontal lines that we usually call scores relative to the vertical stem line. The 3rd group crosses the stem line diagonally, and the 4th group consists of 1 to 5 scores, or sometimes called notches in this case, on the stem line representing vowels. You might be wondering how we know all of this when it is such an ancient script. Well, knowledge of Ogham was never really lost, or at least not completely anyway, as the script continued in certain contexts and evolved in the manuscript tradition. So in manuscripts like the Book of Ballymote, Ogham is written left to right on a horizontal stem line. So unlike on stone where it is written vertically. So you can see here that they supply a key to Ogham, telling us that 1 score to the right, or in this case 1 score below the line, is a B, 2 an L, 3 an F, and so on. So each of the Ogham letters also had a name that was a meaningful word in Irish. For example, the first character here is Betha, which means birch tree. You also have Dar, which is an oak tree, Cull, which is hazel, etc. And I have the modern Irish where it has changed, written in brackets here. So you can see where the tree alphabet comes from. But in fact, scholars like Professor Damien McManus at Trinity College have studied early texts on these letter names and have concluded that only 6 of the 20 were originally names of trees. So others like Mwyn, meaning neck, Gort, meaning field, etc., are quite clearly not trees. We can't say for sure how old the letter names actually are, but what is clear is that by the 8th century, the meaning of some of these letters and the original sound they represented were already lost. And these are the 3 with question marks. I'll just move on here to the next one. So the H here, NG, and Z. In fact, these characters rarely occur on Ogham stones, which suggests that the sounds they represent were already falling out of use at this early stage. So while some of the letters and their names have survived more or less intact, others were either misinterpreted or lost and replaced by artificial forms based on Latin. And this is the case with the H and G and Z. I've given here the phonetic, what we think is how these letters may have actually been pronounced. So in this case, this character would represent the sound gu as opposed to g, which is a bit of a parallel here to the k and qu, which we are actually sure of. And the st here is, we're fairly sure, and this character, which is later given the H, we're really unsure about this one, most of all. So the fact that many of the letter names which survived into later stages of the language were names of trees undoubtedly encouraged the compilers of the alphabet key to attach names of trees to the rest of the letter names, a number of which were no longer understood. Fortunately, our earliest and least contaminated source on the form and meaning of the letter names helps us to establish many, though unfortunately not all, of the original values and meanings. Along with loss or changes to the original set of Ogham letters or characters, there were also some additions. A fifth group of 5 supplementary characters is included in the manuscript tradition on Ogham. So for example, the character for P, as there was no P originally in Irish. However, only one of these extra characters occurs frequently on the inscriptions on stone, and it appears as 2 diagonal scores crossing each other on the stem line in the shape of an X. This character is used with 2 values. The first, a consonant, usually transliterated K and pronounced K, as in the word here, which is what is actually on the stone here, a kevrity. And the second value is the vowel E, although it is only found used as a vowel in the relatively recent inscriptions. The fact that this character occurs in some of our oldest inscriptions also suggests that the language had already developed and changed since the creation of the script. So, what do Ogham inscriptions actually say? Well, the inscriptions are generally quite short and mainly consist of personal names in the genitive or possessive case, the Tishel Genedach in modern Irish, meaning that another word is to be understood before the name. So like stone of, name of, or perhaps even territory of. Frequently, the father's name and even the name of the kindred or ancestor is added. There are a number of formula words used, the most frequent being Mochi, modern Irish moch, meaning son. Tribal or kin group affiliation is expressed by awi, grandson or remote descendant in modern Irish, o, or by mokoi, the word mokoi, which means more or less the same thing, we think descendant or kindred, followed by the name of the ancestor. The term mokoi doesn't survive into the modern language as it was replaced by a number of alternative terms such as Corcu and Dáil and suffixes like riga in the early medieval period. They didn't have surnames in this period, and adding the father's or grandfather's name was a way of more clearly identifying the person commemorated. In time, this formula became fossilized, resulting in the Irish names that still survive today, like MacMahon, O'Neill, etc. The words Nyota, meaning nephew, or more specifically sister's son, and Inigena, meaning daughter, are each attested only once. Other less frequent formula words include Anam, meaning name or inscription, Koi, which we're not absolutely sure of, but seems to correspond to Ikyaket on British inscriptions, meaning here lies, Kela, meaning companion or client. Very occasionally, extra information is given. For example, Cremator, which means priest, is found on the Arid stone on Mount Brandon, County Kerry, and Velitas, poet, on an Ogham stone further east in County Kerry. So let's take a look at the inscription that's actually found on this particular stone here on the left. So the stone we're looking at here is located near the Gap of Dunloe on the Eva Peninsula in County Kerry. It reads Dagos, Makwi, Mokoi, Toi, Kaki, which means roughly of Daig, son of the descendant of Toikakas. So this is an example of where the word Mokoi, followed by an ancestor name in Ogham, is later found in manuscript sources in a changed format, where instead of the use of Mokoi, the suffix riga has been added to the ancestor name to form a kin group name. So the Mokoi Toikaki is the same as Toigriga, which we find later on. So the kin group are still around, but their name has evolved. Another example of this formula is found in the modern barony name Corca Dhuibhne in West Kerry, where we find a number of examples of Ogham inscriptions containing the kin group name Mokoi, again, Dhuibhneas. And Mokoi Dhuibhneas means descendants of the goddess Dhuibhne, which is the earlier equivalent of Corca Dhuibhne. So Corca being the equivalent, the later equivalent of Mokoi. So this Ogham stone also nicely illustrates the layout of Ogham inscriptions on stone. Typically, the angle or aris of the stone is used as a stem line for the Ogham characters. As suggested by medieval commentators in our later manuscript sources, you should read Ogham inscriptions as you climb a tree, starting at the bottom and progressing upwards. So starting at the very bottom here, we have the D, which is 2 scores to the left of the stem line, the D of Dagos. And you read up along, and we have D, 4 notches there for an E. Then we have the 2 parallel slanted lines for a G, and then we have 2 notches for an O. And then this is followed by 1 slanted or diagonal line for an M and A, Q, I. So that's our Makwi here. So we have actually Dago Makwi. So where is this S? Well, it's actually here on the face of the stone. So what seems to have happened here is that the carver missed the S and added it afterwards. And this may suggest that the S was no longer pronounced, perhaps. So sometimes the mistakes we see on Ogham stones can tell us a little bit about the language. Okay, so if you have a longer inscription, then the text will continue over the top and down the other side, the opposite angle. In most cases, the inscription reads up the left-hand angle of one of the faces and down the right. However, occasionally we find inscriptions reading up on both angles or up on the right and down the left. Here we have a rare example of an Ogham inscription on the face of a stone from Painstown in County Meath, which is now in the National Museum of Ireland collection. This is also one of the few cases where we can tentatively match an individual named in an inscription with an early reference in manuscript sources. This may be the same Mac Cartan of a Leinster poem who was an Ienna Glash king of Leinster and Tara. Also a Mac Cartan Mac Quailbuth mentioned in the annals in AD 446. Interestingly, most of the Welsh inscriptions are bilingual in Latin script and language on the face and in Ogham and the Irish language on the edge. Before I move on from the topic of the physical appearance of Ogham inscriptions on stone, I wanted to point out a few basic observations regarding how the stones were carved. Some of you no doubt watched Roger Staley's fascinating Trasna na Tíre lecture on high crosses a few months ago, and how great trouble was taken to source stone for the crosses, and at times traveling great distances to a suitable quarry where a certain amount of preparation and shaping of the stone was undertaken. For the vast majority of Ogham stones, they simply used whatever stone was available locally. For example, in counties Wicklow and Carlow, they mainly used granite, even though it is a difficult stone to carve. And you saw earlier that water-rolled stones from a nearby storm beach were used in County Kerry, even though they don't actually have an angle because it's a smoothed, rounded edge. There was also little or no preparation of the surface of the stone in most cases. And although there is quite a range in the standard of execution and layout, Ogham inscriptions in general can fairly be described as being relatively crude. So Ogham inscriptions were carved using more or less the same carving techniques and tools that are still used today. A few years ago, I asked a sculpture friend of mine to have a look at some Ogham stones to see if he could identify and reproduce any specific techniques. And in almost every case, he was able to point out evidence for what tools and techniques were used and replicate them on different types of stone. So mainly the tool that was used was, I suppose, the point chisel, which is second from the left here, but they also used flat chisels, and these are the two here next to the point chisel. So the most common technique observed was picking, also called pocking, which is carried out using a point chisel struck with a hammer or mallet. It produces a rough, usually quite broad score, and chalk was frequently used in the past to highlight the inscriptions, and residue or build-up in the grooves or in the scores, as you can see here, can obscure tool marks, making it sometimes difficult to tell what technique was used. And this is not the case here, but you can see the residue of the chalk that was used here. Occasionally, when a particularly sharp conical point has been used, the tool leaves behind distinctive pinholes in the groove of a score if it hasn't been rubbed smooth or weathered away. It's not very clear here, but perhaps you can see some of these tiny pinpricks almost in the stone, and these are the marks left behind by the point chisel. Another common technique is V cutting. And this technique is usually carried out using a flat chisel struck at an angle, which produces cleaner, neater, and usually narrower scores with a distinctive V shape and a line often visible at the bottom of the score, which may also at times be rubbed or weathered, making it difficult to distinguish from picked scores. And these are some examples of the V scores, the V cutting, although it's a bit hard to see again. And again, here you can see there's some residue in these scores as well, which may have originally been chalk or some other substance. Another thing to note here, actually, this is another one of these rounded edges on the stone here. And instead of using the notches like we see here for vowels, here these are vowels right along the edge here, and these are more, they're scores, but they're shorter than the consonant scores, but they're not quite the notches that you find if you have an actual right angle on the edge of the stone. So just to point out that sometimes the vowels look a little more like just slightly shorter scores, especially on the more rounded stones. And finally, then we have a very different technique described as scoring. And this technique may be carried out using any sharp object, such as the point of a point chisel or the corner of a flat chisel scraping along in a straight line. It could also be produced by tapping lightly on a flat chisel at a 90-degree angle to the stone. The result is a very fine score, which seems to be particularly common, though not exclusive, to Ogham stones in County Cork, which is why it is sometimes called the Cork style. And these scores can sometimes be so fine that you can barely see them. I have seen some examples that are very difficult to see, actually. So many Ogham inscriptions actually exhibit evidence of a combination of techniques, and it would seem that some inscriptions were initially picked, and then the resulting scores were then either rubbed smooth with a suitable small stone, perhaps, or V-cut with a flat chisel. The choice of technique would have depended on a number of factors, including the carver's preferred style, the tools available to him or her, and of course the stone type. And here you can see then the various techniques recreated by the sculptor Shane O'Dree. So you have the picking here. This is what it looks like when it's freshly carved, and then the V-cut with the distinctive line down the center. And then this is your typical vowel notch, and then your scoring, where any kind of sharp object can be used for a very fine score. Okay, so for the rest of this talk then, I'm going to focus in on the Ogham in 3D project and tell you a bit about that and the work of the project. So it began back in 2010 in the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. The main focus of the School of Celtic Studies is on the various stages of the Irish language in particular, and the school is home to the Irish Script on Screen project, which digitizes Irish manuscripts and makes high-resolution images available online. So like the page from the Book of Ballymote that we saw a bit earlier. So inspired by the way ISAS makes these important Irish language resources available worldwide, the Ogham in 3D project was set up to do the same for our earliest written Irish sources, the Ogham inscriptions on stone. However, whereas high-quality two-dimensional images are ideal for representing text on manuscript pages, Ogham inscriptions on stone require an extra dimension to accurately represent the shape of the stone. Furthermore, unlike most epigraphy, which is found on the flat face of the stone, you have seen how Ogham inscriptions wrap around the angle or the edge, making Ogham probably uniquely a three-dimensional script. Another reason for recording Ogham stones in 3D is that it has the potential for enhanced visualization. So for example, you can strip away the texture or color of the stone, making it easier to see the Ogham inscription and any other carving that might be on the stone. So this is another one from the Dingle Peninsula. And you can see that there's a lot of lichen and different things on the stone, and it can distract from the actual inscription. And especially when it's a dull day, as it was here when the photograph was taken, it can be particularly hard to make out the inscription. This is by no means the hardest one to read. But when you strip away the texture and the color, you can more clearly read the actual inscription. So between 2012 and 2015, this project was funded by the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and supervised by the National Monument Service to prioritise the recording and digitisation of home stones in state care or with a preservation order. And this amounted to less than a quarter of the total in Ireland, although we did include many home stones that were not in state care that happened to be in the area where we were carrying out fieldwork. So we also partnered with the Discovery Programme, Centre for Archaeology and Innovation in Ireland, who have particular expertise in 3D capture, modelling and visualisation. The main aims of the project were to record in 3D as many as possible of the surviving home stones, and not just those in state care, as I said, before further loss or deterioration occurred. So weathering, neglect, and occasionally even vandalism. To make home inscriptions, stones, and sites more accessible to students, researchers, and the general public by developing a dedicated, searchable website, including descriptions, photographs, maps, and of course 3D models of the stones. To use the 3D data to assist, where possible, in the reading of weathered or worn inscriptions, to potentially facilitate analysis of carving techniques and tools, and to inform conservation policy. And finally, to advance the field of home studies generally by carrying out multidisciplinary research. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about fieldwork, data capture methods and challenges. So the very expensive laser scanner that we used in the early stages of the project quickly became obsolete and was replaced by a structured light scanner, which you see here, an Artec EVA in 2013. So this was the main scanner that we used between 2013 and 2015, I think. So one of the advantages of this type of recording technology is that it is non-contact. Some of the techniques used in the past to record home inscriptions were effective, but risked damaging the stone and the inscription. As to challenges we faced in the field, well, the main challenge in Ireland is always the weather, but also the fact that home stones are frequently located in remote areas and are sometimes even difficult to find. They can be overgrown, and the details that we have of the actual location can sometimes not be terribly precise. But when we do record them, we also record the coordinates, of course, so we'll be able to find them again. So when the weather was suitable for fieldwork, the challenge was to keep light out, as the scanner does not work well in daylight, even overcast light, which meant bringing along a blackout tent, as well as a generator to power the scanner and laptop, and sometimes carrying equipment quite a distance from the road. I often wondered what the locals thought as well when they saw this big black tent in the field. It looks rather like a crime scene or something, I think. So this is the setup then inside the tent, which gets very warm, as you can imagine, in the summertime. So when we use our scanner, the handheld scanner, as we're recording, you can see the data comes up instantaneously on the screen of the laptop, so you know exactly what you've got, what you've actually captured. So in addition to the handheld laser scanning, we also used a terrestrial scanner, faro focus, with a lower resolution but a greater range, and this was used to capture the context of the home stones that were included in a structure such as a church or a suzerain. So for example, at Kilmail Cader, the home stone is just out of the picture here in front of the church, but we also recorded the church itself and a few other carved stones that were there as well. And we used, you can see the faro focus set up there to record the church, as you wouldn't use a handheld scanner for such a large building. So that's what that was used for. So the data collected was then used to create 3D animations or fly-throughs, facilitating virtual tours of the sites and putting the Ogham stones in context, albeit a secondary context in the case of reuse, for example, where stones are built into a suzerain or a church. In a small number of examples, the Ogham stones were too large or too awkwardly positioned to fit inside a tent, and so these had to be scanned at night, which was a lot of fun. When I say that some of the Ogham stones were too large, I didn't mention this earlier, but you actually do sometimes find Ogham inscriptions on prehistoric standing stones, and sometimes these are actually very large indeed. The largest Ogham stone we have is actually one of these prehistoric standing stones on the Beara Peninsula in County Cork in the townland of Fonkill in the Woods. That's actually our largest Ogham stone in Ireland. So following advances then in the capabilities of 3D software to more quickly and accurately produce 3D models from photographs, by 2015, we had started using photogrammetry as an alternative method of data capture. And this made fieldwork a lot simpler. We had less cost, less equipment, less of an issue with light, although I suppose light is always going to be an issue with recording objects like this, but it was less of an issue than with the scanner. And most importantly, I suppose it allowed for community co-production of 3D models. And this resulted in, we set up between the Discovery Programme and Ogham 3D, we set up the Corca Dhuibhne 3D project in West Kerry, based in Ballyferriter on the Dingle Peninsula. And it was a group of local participants, and they're actually still active, who recorded the Ogham stones in the area, well, the ones that we hadn't recorded already. And they actually went on to record other types of carved stone as well, such as cross slabs and rock art and whatever is in their local area that they're interested in. So they developed their own website, and this page is from the website, and they also supplied 3D models to the Ogham 3D project as well. So our own website then was launched in 2013 as a work in progress, and has currently over 160 Ogham stones digitized, so a bit less than half of the known number surviving in Ireland. 3D models were originally made available for download in OBJ and PDF format, and you have the 3D PDF here, along with the maps, map tab here. You have photographs, linguistic and other historical information on the content of the inscription, as well as descriptions of the stone and the site, and links to their equivalent records on the in the Archaeological Survey of Ireland database. So colleagues at the Discovery Programme developed advanced visualization techniques, and then in 2014 we began using the 3D platform Sketchfab, which allowed 3D models to be embedded into the Ogham 3D website. And then, of course, you can make that full screen then as well. So these developments allowed for visually enhanced 3D models to be viewed instantaneously online and easily manipulated. However, only the Ogham stones recorded since 2014 have so far been uploaded to Sketchfab. So there are still a good few Ogham 3D models that are not on Sketchfab. So you have to still download the 3D PDF or the OBJ if you have the software to use it. I'm not going to try a live 3D demonstration online, just in case it might be tempting fate a little bit. So I'll let you check those out yourselves in your own time. So the website also gradually developed as a research and teaching tool with new search options frequently added. So Ogham records can be searched by personal names found in the inscriptions. And you have a list here. Formula words such as Makwi, son of, etc. By site type. The records can also be searched by Ogham stones with crosses or other additional features, or by a relative chronology of linguistic features listed under approximate dates. So we also added the ability to map whatever search results in order to visualize the geographical distribution of your particular search. So for example, here I put in a search for Divinus, which we talked about a bit earlier, and also the later form Divinia, where the final S has been lost. And we get 4 results. I think we have a 5th one since added, but 4 at the time here. And you can see they are all on the Dingle Peninsula there in the Barony of Corca Dhuibhne. So obviously, this would all be more useful with a complete digital corpus. But unfortunately, following reduced funding after 2015, funding for the project ended in 2017. So in the intervening years, small-scale local grants have helped to progress the recording of Ogham stones around the country. For example, this year, we received funding from the Heritage Council through the Heritage Office at Kilkenny County Council to record and digitise the remaining Ogham stones in County Kilkenny. We'd already 3 or 4 of them done, and we now have, well, a complete list of the stones that are on site in County Kilkenny. There are actually 2 more that are in the National Museum that I have yet to add to the website, but I will do that shortly. So we almost have a complete set of Ogham stones for County Kilkenny now digitised. So I'm going to finish with a few more images to show how 3D technology has improved visualization of Ogham and ability to engage with Ogham stones and their inscriptions. So there is an Ogham stone from Kilunton, again in West Kerry, and recorded by the Corca Dhuibhne 3D project by participants on the project down there. And this is one of the very few examples in Ireland of a stone with both an Ogham inscription and a Latin or Roman letter inscription on the face. So this is possibly representing a period of transition between the use of Ogham script to record names on stone and the later use of the Latin script to do the same, but in a very different way. And that's a whole other lecture. So not enough of the Ogham survives here to get a definite reading, but the Latin letter inscription has the name Fintan written vertically here, although the F, as you can see, has almost disappeared. So this is possibly a commemoration of the founding saint of Kilunton, which is the Church of Fintan. So this next slide then demonstrates how 3D technology can be used to reconstruct digitally broken Ogham stones. So both of these survive in 3 fragments. On the left, we have a digital reconstruction by the Discovery Programme of an Ogham stone from Monataggart in County Cork, which is now in the National Museum. And on the right, we have another digital reconstruction, this time by Simon Dowling, of an Ogham stone from Tuberculay, which is a well site in County Waterford. So my final slide then tonight is of a 3D print of one of the Ogham stones recorded by the Ogham 3D project from Ardmore in County Waterford. This was actually one of the first stones we recorded on site in 3D, so probably in 2012. So one of the things I have been doing in the last couple of years is visiting primary schools around the country with the wonderful Heritage in Schools program. So exploring our own heritage with the children and using 3D technology to engage with home stones and inscriptions. So I am currently involved in a pilot virtual Heritage in Schools program in counties Kilkenny and Donegal at the moment, which will hopefully be rolled out nationwide before long. So that's what I'm at the moment. And I hope that some of you discovered something that you didn't know before about Ogham here tonight. I'm happy to answer a few questions, or at least to try to answer if I can. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Nora. Thank you so much. I've got plenty of questions come in over the course of the lecture. The first one is from Colm O'Rourke, and his question is, why is there an apparent lack of Ogham stones in the Midlands?
Well, we don't know really, to be honest. Yeah, it's very hard to say. I mean, I suppose I should point out that we are still finding Ogham stones, and that occasionally stones do turn up. Now, most of the time they're fragmentary, or you know, that we don't have a definite name or anything. We just have maybe a few letters turn up. So new ones are still being found, but there certainly does seem to be a lack of Ogham stones across the centre. I don't know why. Yeah, we don't know. Sorry, I can't be more helpful on that one.
That's okay, Nora. And you kind of touched on another question there. Are Ogham stones still being discovered, and how many are currently being discovered, or have they all been found really at this stage?
You would think at this stage they would all be found, but in fact they are still being discovered. As I said, they're generally fragments, and the problem with fragments is that it's so hard to be sure if it's actually Ogham. I mean, a line on stone can be a lot of things. You know, lines can be very often plough marks on stone, can look a bit like Ogham scores and that kind of thing. So it can be very hard to be sure. So we have a lot of possible Ogham stones. We have a lot with question marks that, you know, we've kind of we're keeping a list of them, but we're not certain about them. But there was one that was found a couple of years ago. We're actually at the moment putting together an article on it. It was a full, complete, clear in the sense that it's clearly Ogham, although we don't have a definite name. But that one was found in South Tipperary. And there aren't a lot of stones from Tipperary, actually. There are none at all from North Tip. And this was only the third discovered in South Tipperary. So so a nice find. And that's one that you hopefully keep your eyes peeled. I think we're going to publish something soon in Archaeology Ireland on that. So watch out for that.
That's great. Thank you, Nora. And there's just a question come in there from somebody about how to clean the stones. So Nora, obviously we don't want anyone who's unqualified going near these stones. So would you just outline, if someone does come across a stone, what steps should they take and who should they inform?
Yeah, the best thing is not to touch it at all, I suppose, really. I mean, if it's just a matter of dirt or something on the stone, then it's certainly just water, nothing else. I wouldn't put touch a stone with anything, an Ogham inscription with anything else. It's best just to leave them. And if you do find anything, you can either, well, I suppose the National Monument Service would be the main ones to contact, or you can contact us at Ogham in 3D and we can put you in touch with the National Monument Service. I do often get contacted about Ogham stones, so we always do check them out, although sometimes, as I say, it turns out to be something else, but we'll always check it out anyway.
Great. And I think you should have a couple of emails on your inbox with potential Ogham stones tomorrow morning when you log in. Yeah, I imagine you are. I've one there from Patrick, and Katie asked the same questions as well. Would the Ogham inscriptions have been painted at their time of use?
It's possible, certainly possible. We haven't found any evidence of that as yet, as far as I know, but we haven't looked for it either. So, you know, it's certainly possible, and I'll certainly be keeping my eyes peeled for anything like that. But I suppose traces of would have been long lost. So you'd need some very scientific analysis, I would imagine, to find traces of paint or whatever might have been used to put color on them. So it hasn't been looked into, but it's certainly possible.
Thanks a million, Nora. And one final question then. Are the inscriptions deteriorating over time? We see it with rock art and other stuff that's exposed to the elements, and they're deteriorating a lot over the last century or so. Are we having the same problem with Ogham stones?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I have seen even photographs. We have, photographs that were taken in the past, and you can see that the inscription was much clearer in the past. So yeah, it does happen a lot. And also you have lichen growth and things like that can obscure the inscription, which is, lichen growth is not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means sometimes that you can't actually read the inscription anymore. So yeah, but weathering is certainly a problem. I mean, you even see it. I mean, I showed an image there of an Ogham stone in a souterrain earlier on, and it was so clear, and it was completely untouched by weathering because it had been underground probably since it was maybe only 200 years since it had been carved. It was put underground and it was there since, and it was very, very clear, and you can really see the difference. And of course it also depends on the type of stone. Some stone weathers a lot quicker than others, so it can depend on the type of stone as well.
That's great. Thanks a million, Nora. That was a fascinating talk. We've got some very complimentary comments there in the chat box. I'll send them all on to you tomorrow. Thanks a million for joining us and providing such a fantastic insight into the amazing work you do. Really appreciate it. Just before we finish up, I'd just like to highlight the lectures that we have coming up over the next week. So today is actually the centenary of the death of Sean Tracy, who died in Talbot Street 100 years ago today, actually. So on Sunday, the 18th, there is a commemoration from the Friends of Sean Tracy and Commoran and Nogluk to commemorate the anniversary of his death. So that's at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. On Monday, the 19th, we have Sean Murray with us. Sean is a film producer. He recently produced a documentary that was shown on RTE called Unquiet Graves, which covers the history of the Glenanne gang and potential collusion in the north of Ireland, and is really he's been in the media a lot really over the last number of weeks since it was shown on RTE. So he's with us on Monday the 19th at 8, and this time next week then, Wednesday again, we're joined by Dr. Anne-Marie Whitaker, who's going to cover Australia's rebel history and the 1798 memorial. So plenty happening. If we are in level 4 of lockdown, there's plenty happening here in Trasnatira. So thanks again, Nora, very insightful, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. God bless.
Bye.